Hey, it's Phil, and welcome on the Habit Bootcamps podcast, where I interview entrepreneurs and coaches about their mindset shifts and habits. In this episode, I interview Craig Perra, who is a porn recovery coach. Craig used to go through an escalating cycle of porn addiction, prostitutes, and drug abuse, until he even got fired at his job and had a failed suicide attempt. He had hit such a low point in his life that he finally found help. And now he's helping other people overcome bad addictions, porn addiction, and replace them with mindful, healthy habits. This is a raw, honest conversation about the dark aspects of masculinity and porn addiction. You will learn a lot about how it evolved, what our mindset is, but also how we can replace it with the right, good, mindful habits. In this podcast, we talked about how we numb ourselves and escape from pain, how we can fulfill our needs in healthier ways, how to integrate our dark fantasies and fetishes after overcoming porn addiction, why we shouldn't just focus on quitting a bad habit or quitting an addiction, but instead we should replace them with mindful, healthy habits, and about the power of meditation and mindfulness. As always, let me know what you've learned about porn recovery, porn addiction, and how to replace bad habits with good habits by dropping a comment below, and enjoy this week's podcast. Hey Craig, welcome on the podcast, man.
Oh, it's so great to be here. Thank you for having me.
If I would be meeting you on New Year's Eve and I didn't know you and I would be shaking your hand and I would ask you, what's your passion? What would you answer?
My passion is helping people become the best version of themselves. That's what motivates me. That's what moves me. That's where I get my significance need met, and that's my why.
When did you realize that the version that I'm right now is not really an optimized or a better version of myself? What was the first event or mindset shift that propelled you to work on a better version of yourself?
Well, I've struggled with a variety of compulsive behaviors, Philip, all my life. And drugs, alcohol, sex, marijuana, lying, cheating, more drugs, sex, prostitutes, and most of the time, I was able to manage that behavior while living what on the outside appeared to be a very productive life. So in my past lives, I've been an executive for billion-dollar companies. I've been blessed with the gift of intelligence. So that was like a life preserver for me. It kept me afloat while there were times when the rest of my life was falling apart. But because I had these gifts, most of the time I was able to live a pretty good life, although not in integrity. But there were a couple times where that behavior just took me to a new dark place. And 7 years ago was one of those dark places. So I sunk so low, Philip. I was lying to my wife. I was cheating on her with prostitutes. I was lying about my porn use, and I had started using drugs with the prostitutes because in addition to yeah,
Often these addictions don't come in one package. They come
no,
in several
no.
packages.
And so not only was the behavior completely out of control, you add drugs to that. And at the time, just to put this in perspective, I had been fired from a job where I worked back on the East Coast of the United States. I was an assistant general counsel for a $3 billion a year company, fancy pants, in garage parking, my own office, support staff, team of people. And I got fired for lying to my boss about something very, very stupid. But I'm the comeback kid. I got a better job. I moved my family cross country from the East Coast, 3,000 miles to California. And within 8 months, I was in an inpatient drug rehab facility where I had literally lost my mind. I had sunk to a new low. I was unable to keep that other part of my life moving forward, the career part. And I lost my job again. that propelled me into a downward spiral where eventually I realized the only thing that I could do was to kill myself. And I tried to kill myself and I failed. I ended up in an inpatient drug addiction facility for 3 days. And that was rock bottom for me 7 years ago, 8 years ago, approximately.
Yeah, before we delve into the different aspects of this addiction, something that you said also resonates with me because often people think like people who are addicted, they have no life, they're lazy or whatever. But you have this obsessive compulsive characteristic of an addiction. But I used to smoke weed for 16 years, 2 joints a day, but I was still like squashing 4 hours in a row. I was still reading books. I was still super productive. I was pretty much black and white personality and obsessive compulsive about good things, which are good for me, but also very obsessive compulsive in bad things like addiction. So very difficult to moderate.
Yeah, no, I connect with that deeply. I was a functioning addict, and quite frankly, pretty high functioning. I did well for myself. I had a great job. I got paid a great salary. I had
High
a beautiful
functioning and
home.
functioning on a high.
Yeah, functioning on a high, exactly. But it my life has been punctuated by these benders, by these explosions where I just throw everything, and I've got a beautiful wife. I've got 2 beautiful children. Right now they're 14 years old and they're 11 years old, and I was willing to throw that all away. And it was in that moment after I sniffed a big pile of drugs, where I realized that, oh my God, what did I just do? What, how could I throw that away? I don't want to die. 911, help. And of course they lock me up for 3 days. That's what they do here in the States. Usually it's a 3-day mandatory hold when you're all screwed up. But I checked myself in. I realized that I need some serious help. I realized also too, Philip, that I couldn't do the same thing that had failed me over the years, because if you look back 7 years, we're talking hundreds, if not, it feels like thousands of hours of traditional therapy, many meetings. 12 steps is a really popular program here. And when I was calling around looking to get help, because I knew whoever I chose, that's where I was putting all my eggs in that basket.
Mm.
I had to find the right person who was going to treat me, who was going to give me tools, teachings, and techniques that would empower me to be the best version of me. And I knew that I couldn't do the same things that hadn't worked or hadn't completely worked again. And it was in that that journey that I discovered mindfulness and habits and other techniques beyond the disease-based model of addiction. And that, changed my life and brought me to where I'm at today, which is a really great place.
It's always difficult to go back in the past because that version of yourself seems like such a stranger. Like you never understand, like, how could I think this way? But for Craig, who was like ready to kill himself, like what were the thoughts going on in your mind to reach that point in that decision?
I felt, well, I was chronically depressed, and I had these 2 sides of me, like this, the successful family man. And I no longer could reconcile those 2 sides. The other side, the dark side, grew in power. And it eventually overtook me to a place where I had just sunk to a profound low. The drug use got worse. I was always able to keep the job thing together, minus getting fired for lying to my boss in that other job I told you about. I was always able to keep it together. I was always able to for these 2 parts to live, to go home every day after work, well, not right after work. I'd have to go get some of my sneaky business in first, but I was always able to compartmentalize. And the low was a new low. It was never before I had the compulsive sexual problems wrapped up with the drug problems. And I was using heroin. I was using a synthetic a chemical called bath salts, which is you may have heard about those drugs.
I think Hunter S. Thompson used it in a certain scene.
Listen, I've seen and read some of Hunter S. Thompson's. That bender 7 years ago felt like he was by my side. I mean, it was literally out of control, because now I'm physiologically addicted to both stimulants, heroin. The stimulant addiction came from my Ritalin prescription. My doctor had prescribed me Ritalin, and I had worked her up to 60 milligrams a day, and I was snorting my Ritalin. And then when that ran out, I went to crystal meth. When that ran out, I went to bath salts, and then I had to come down. So those were the opiates, and it was a profound, new, and dark low for me.
That's a lot of things on Craigslist.
A lot of things on Craigslist. Exactly. You know, and being Craig and all, you know, it's not my list, but I spent a lot of time on Craigslist, you know, trolling for, you know, sexual connections. And it was just such you know, as the high wore off, the depression became so pronounced, and I was so disgusted with myself. You know, it felt so hopeless. You know, here I am now in California. I knew I hadn't technically gotten fired yet. They called me and said, leave right now. You're on paid administrative leave. We got to figure out what's going on, because they had gotten my attendance records, because I was in a facility by myself. I was the highest ranking member, you know, guy in the business at that facility. And, you know, nobody knew I was leaving work every day hours early. You know, even though I could make my own hours, they got the time cards, and they said, well, wait a minute. This is a problem. Then they started investigating. Then they started to find the emails of me seeking drugs and sex in the emails. And it took them a while to do that investigation. But during that time, I used it as an opportunity to get help for myself. But
yeah, often they say it's battling addiction, but you know, I've been going through addictions myself, and I'm still going through addiction. I'm prone to addictions. It's often that they say battling addictions, but it's almost battling yourself, battling that old version and that new version that doesn't have enough cheerleaders on his side to actually believe in it. But you know, you want to cultivate willpower and have self-control, and as soon as you slip back in that old identity, you feel like you failed your future self, you failed your better self. So you're split in half, and you don't know who you are anymore. You
That's
don't
right.
believe you can be that good person because you got too much experience of that addictive behavior, and you feel just repulsed by that old version of you, and you're like stuck in between, especially in the beginning when quitting an addiction.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And having the realities of my life sink in, that here I am now. I was about to lose another high profile job. You know, like I was able to cover up the last termination. Now 8 months later, I'm fired again. And I realized that because of where I was located, there wasn't a single company in 75 miles that needed me, except for the one I got fired for. So now the thought of having to move again was terrifying. The thought of you know, having to rebuild again felt so impossible. The thought of coming back, you know, from this just didn't feel like it was something that I can do. And in a moment of just sheer desperation and pain and suffering, I said, you know what? If I just checked out, the world would be a better place. And as soon as I did it, I was like, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing? Of course I can fix this. You know, my wife might not stay with me. My kids may be living someplace else, but I certainly can fix me, and they need me as their father. And my family needed me because I was the sole provider. There was no other money coming in. It was up to me, and that pressure really wore on me over the years as well. And, you know, ultimately leading to D-Day, you know, where I tried to kill myself. And, but fortunately I found some great help. And 7 years later, I couldn't be in a better place.
It resonates what you're saying. The thought that comes up in me is now like when you're addicted and, when you're just with yourself, you're just fleeing, but you can still take some roles. Like I'm the functioning boss, I'm the functioning husband, I'm the functioning father, and you can still perform those roles pretty well. You're like, yeah, maybe I'm a bit addicted, but I can still function good in this way. But when even those roles that you play that provide a bit of stability start crumbling down and the addiction is even affecting these things, it's like, whoa, this is really affecting every aspect of my life, not just something I do in my free time and that's it.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I was no longer able to compartmentalize. I was no longer able to, addict is just over here in this part of my head. The rest of my head is working. And, I was one of those guys, Filip, that's so identified with their career.
Mm-hmm.
I was attorney Craig. I was business executive Craig. I was not just business executive, but business executive for $1 billion company Craig. I was successful Craig. I was the people in my circle looked up to because I was probably one of the more successful people, at least financially, in my peer group. And, when that shattered, when that exploded, when they said, Craig, you need to leave, don't take your laptop, we'll call you, don't call us, we've got to figure out what's going on here, you are now officially on paid administrative leave. I was like, whoa, wait. And I knew as soon as I got that call, I knew the gig was up. I knew they were going to find emails. I knew they were going to see my schedule. I knew they were going to see me, beeping in and out like at 2:00 when everyone else is working till 5 or 6. I knew the gig was up, and there was that sense of hopelessness and fear, and having to go back and tell my wife, hey, honey, guess what? I got fired again. That was too hard to think about, and that's why suicide was a viable option.
Yeah, because so many things still think like a human doing and think like as long as I have that high position job or have that money, I must be happy or I can't be unhappy. Even like celebrities who have a lot of money, there's like I have every money in the world to do whatever I want, but still I don't really feel satisfied. So even those people who don't have an addiction, still they have something inside that they flee from and that they're not really satisfied. If you go back in the past, how did this drug use and porn and prostitute use escalate? Did it only happen in your adolescence? Were there some important moments in your life that transitioned you into that escalating use?
Yeah, well, without making excuses, I had some challenges growing up. So that numbing, coping, and escaping behavior forged in me at a very young age. So I was sexually abused. I was physically abused. I was, had all sorts of challenges in my childhood. I was given up for adoption. So like my first experience with the universe was disconnect.
Mm.
And then, being sexually abused, and then, having some challenges at home with my parents, God bless them, who did the best they could, but there were some challenges. And so that compartmentalizing, that numbing, coping, and escaping behavior, first starting with porn, a little bit with drugs, but always able to manage it, just, heavy experimentation. And it grew in me, and this notion of having these two sides to me. This hypersexual side, the liar, the cheater, the man who sought significance through conquest. Even if I was paying for it, I still perceived it as a conquest, which is obviously pathetic when you look back on it. But that was the lens through which I was experiencing my world. I saw that so much of my behavior was seeking significance, trying to find, looking for love in all the wrong places, so to speak. And that would grow. Now I'd be able to maintain it, and then something would happen. Something would shake that world up. So I'm 46 now. In my 30s, it was a relationship that went south. It was one of the strippers that I had been dating, pulled the plug, said, whoa, wait a minute. This is getting too heavy, too fast. I can't be doing this with you. So they'd cut that relationship off, and then I would sink into a deep depression. That happened in my 30s.
Because it was too romantically involved, or because the sex you demanded was too extreme?
All of the above. I think there were multiple factors. I think both of those things played a role in me. Yeah.
Because I'm still in the porn recovering phase, and I'm coming more out in the open with it, and it's an honest conversation with yourself. I think indeed the feeling of conquest, the domination, the feeling like a man, that not being emotionally tied to a woman, because someone said you don't pay the hooker to come, you pay the hooker to leave.
That's right.
And then it's you don't feel judged. She does what she wants. It's not too emotional. You have some affection. So sometimes sex is a framework in which you can have a very safe emotional connection, intimate connection that maybe you miss in real life, and then it's like gone again. So what do you think are some reasons why people look for hookers or porn, or what they're missing? Or
yeah, great question,
also,
Filip.
even with the more extreme porn use, like I also talked with Adrian about it, like just looking up some different kind of porn that I haven't seen before. I mean, nobody would ever say that I would like that stuff. I'm not saying I like that stuff, but it was just something different, and browsing for like an hour and my erection gone. And then, I've been watching porn and jerking off for an hour, so I might as well come. I did all this effort of clicking for something, and
That's right.
And you feel like this is how I waste my time, and now I'm focusing on things without ever building up something. In the end, you want to have like an outside perspective and look at yourself like, is this behavior really benefiting me or not?
Exactly. What I have found, one of the an interesting story. I remember going to see a prostitute, and I'd seen her a couple of times, and I remember her telling me the first time we saw each other, I said, hey, do you want me to go pick up some couple beers or some champagne or a bottle of wine or something? She says, no, I don't drink with my clients, as a lot of them don't. And then around the third or fourth time that I went to see her, I walked in the room, and on the table there were the big Budweiser cans. Two of the big Budweiser cans were there, beer. And I was kind of perplexed because she had already told me she didn't drink with her clients. That was an important boundary that she couldn't cross. And so finally I mustered up the courage to ask her what that was for. And she said, oh, I got it for you. And Filip, my heart stopped. It was like, oh, for me? I'm special? I'm not like the other guys. Like this, like you're breaking the rules for me. And I grabbed my heart, and it felt like I had won the Nobel Peace Prize. And what I learned, because most of my life, Filip, I had always treated the addiction, this obsessive focus on not doing the thing. Stop doing the thing. Don't do the thing. Don't think about the thing. Ignore the thing. So much of my recovery was obsessively focused around not doing the thing. And what that moment represents to me was the needs that these things were meeting for me. I never really understood what needs this behavior was meeting for me. And it was meeting a powerful need for significance. So my porn use was a reflection of how insignificant I really felt. I was numbing, coping, and escaping from that lack of significance, because deep on the inside, I'm this broken, this broken little boy, who's trying to connect, who's trying to get these needs met, albeit in a terribly unhealthy way. And the prostitutes, it wasn't the sex. As important as the sex was, I came to see that the sex was the symptom, and I had never tried to treat that root cause and get those needs met in a healthy, constructive way. And the number one driver of my prostitution, the number one driver of every client that I've ever had, and I've worked with hundreds of men in 25 countries all over the world, is significance. We're seeking significance. We're seeking that feel good connection, that affirmation. You talked about that pseudo intimacy, that connection. That's what it was doing for me. It made me feel good about myself. It made me feel important. It made me feel significant. And that's the need that I was trying to get met, although in a terribly unhealthy, deconstructive way.
It took a significant event to realize it was about your significance.
That's exactly right. I mean, it took a real low. I mean, a low, again, so low, I tried to kill myself. So low, I threw away a job. Now, listen, I hated that job, Philip. I hated my job. I hated my boss. I hated the company. I hated every aspect of it. There was nothing about it I liked, but there are plenty of men who find themselves in that situation who are able to go home to their wives and say, hey, honey, I know we're making a shitload of money here, but I am fucking miserable. I am miserable. I've got to do something else. Can you help me? And no, instead, the only way out I knew was self-sabotage. And that's the route that I chose.
Because a lot of people, when I come up in the open, and at the moment in my group, we're holding like a no porn challenge, people are asking themselves the question like, but you had a beautiful wife. Couldn't you get the intimacy? Couldn't you get the sex? Couldn't you try out kinky things with her? Why did you have to resort to porn to get this? Or couldn't you get significance from your wife and talk about it?
Yeah. Now, I think if I was a normal person, raised with some of those belief systems, didn't have some of that child programming, yeah, of course, the answer is yes. But that part of me was broken at a very young age. And the messaging that I received in a strict Catholic home was that sex is dirty and disgusting, and you save it for someone you love. I was never able to reconcile that. So you add on top of that, this broken adopted boy who feels insignificant anyway. You layer on top of that some of the challenges that we had in my home growing up. You layer on top of that, I started getting touched by an older neighborhood boy when I was 9, 8 maybe. And, this was great. I had this friend who had a whole house to himself. His father was a full-time dentist. His mother was disabled. She couldn't even walk downstairs. So we had all this free space, and we watched porn. And eventually that pornography led to him touching me. He was an older neighborhood boy, so there was a clear power dynamic differential in that relationship. And, that dark side started to grow, that compartmentalization as sex being this dirty, disgusting thing grew. And it grew throughout my life. And I noticed I'd have these relationships, but I was never able to show up in those relationships as my true, authentic sexual self. I always felt shame around my sexuality, what I liked, my dominance. That's not something you do with people you love. And of course it is. Who else are you going to do it with if it's not with someone you love? That's the dance that couples do, exploring each other's drives, desires, and passions in a healthy, constructive way. And so the further I went in that direction, the negative direction, the selfish direction, the further I moved away from love and connection. And sex being part of that love and connection was almost a foreign language. It was just completely, foreign to me, completely foreign to me.
It's interesting what you say because I tried to quit in the porn in the past, by the way, and I'm just going to ask your opinion about it. Um, there are some things that really turn me on and that like they're like a fetish to me or that I really like to do. For instance, at a certain point when I was quitting porn, I was checking out the BDSMtest.org to see like what I liked. Now I don't like to inflict pain and whatever, but I do like role play and I'm a bit dominant, or with ropes or whatever. Oftentimes when we're in a relationship, we see that's something purely based on intimacy and soft feelings and whatever. But when you're like a porn addict, could you play out some of these BDSM things just in a trustful, open, caring, curious way and it's fine? Or will you resort to using this BDSM to actually get control of people and act out dirty fantasies? Or do we have a wrong perception about some elements of BDSM and that you could do it with your partner and it doesn't have to align with dirty fantasies or being in control and other porn related aspects you have? What's your opinion about it?
Yeah, it's what you just said. So one of the quotes that I deliver often is, our the darker side of our sexuality has to flow in the context, in the confines of our committed,
Mm.
intimate, connected relationship. That doesn't mean Niagara Falls, where it's the crazy part of us, that
Mm-hmm.
unchecked, that unfettered, that part, that doesn't have to go to that part, but there's a certain aspects of our sexuality that I think porn reflects. Porn is a mirror, in terms of what turns us on and what flips that switch. Now, what it can do and what it commonly does is people kind of get stuck in that rabbit hole and they sink lower and lower and lower, and they can't even fathom connecting, sharing that with their partner because they've got such shame over what they're watching. But within that,
Mm.
within that, using BDSM, I mean, I know so many couples who have, in a healthy way, been able to explore that role play and able to explore the pleasure surrounding, power exchanges, a dominant, a submissive. Most of my men are, fall on in one of those two categories. They're either dominant and they're unable to express that dominance in the context of their relationship because it's dirty and disgusting and so rooted in their negative habits, they can't even fathom bringing that part of themselves into a connected, loving relationship. Or they're on the submissive side, and that's gay. That's sissy-ish. That's all these labels, whatever it is that they attach. And so what they do is they kind of throw all that away, and then they've got to be, vanilla now in their relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Now, vanilla is a very complicated flavor in and of itself. There's so many different degrees of vanilla, so there's nothing wrong with that. But you are not in authenticity if you're unable to allow that darker part of your sexuality to flow in the context of your committed relationship. And that's one of the hardest things that men have to do, is to begin sharing that themselves with their partner, because all their lives, in some cases 20, 30 years, they've been lying about who they are sexually because they're embarrassed about that part of themselves.
Exactly. This is interesting. That this is also what I wanted to talk with you about because we can have this aspect that we want to be more intimate and soft and foreplay, all the aspects that are not there in porn. But some things in porn actually are desires that we have. And I used to have a lot of shame in the past, like, oh no, that's dirty. I can't talk about this. And maybe when your partner knows that you quit porn, that she could say like, oh no, that's just because of porn. That's just because of porn. But there's just some things that I just like to do, not fixed or because it has to, but because I just like it and it arouses me. So it's not that you have to push away everything that is outside of normality and that turns you on, because else you could cultivate shame about something that inherently arouses you.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And and again, the statement is that darker part of your sexuality needs to flow. Doesn't have to be the strongest river in the world, you know, the Niagara Falls, or you pick your body of water that suits you in your neck of the woods. Doesn't have to be that, but if you bury that side of yourself, if you shame that part of yourself, if you try to stuff that part of yourself down, well, we have a way as humans of our needs getting met, whether we want to get them met or not. And they'll be met consciously, or they'll get met subconsciously, and that'll drive other unhealthy sexual behavior. And I think, because porn has become so prolific, on one hand, it's opened people up to different ways of sexually expressing themselves, but it's not reality. They're heavily edited. They're, it's just, that's not what real sex is. And that corrupts this part of you, and it gets worse and worse, and it keeps graduating to things that, you're watching like the two dwarves and the goat and you name whatever crazy thing you can think of without trying to be gross. You're like, wait a minute, I'm getting off to that. Like, oh my God, I must be a sick individual. So all of it becomes demonized, and all of it gets stuck to the side instead of flowing in the context of that relationship.
Yeah, it's good what you say, because it's a bit of a balance of trying to be with yourselves or our emotions, but also trying to express those desires that we have that may have a little bit of a more darker tint, but that also are a part of our authentic, genuine self, So it's accepting and also expressing at the same time.
That's right. That's right.
At that moment in time when you went into rehab, how did that evolve? Because it must have been devastating for your wife, for your family, and then all that shame, and then that cold turkey. So for anybody who goes through quitting porn addiction or addiction and their loved ones find it out, how does that feel evolve for you?
So at first, my wife was staying with me only to get me back on my feet. There was no chance that we were going to stay together. My wife knew that I was the primary breadwinner, and at a minimum, she had to stay with me to get me back on my feet so I could start working and earning again. And I said to myself, Filip, for every second that she is with me, every second we are in the same apartment, I am going to use that opportunity to show her that I can be the man that she knows that I can be deep down inside. And so I got the right help. So number one is, as soon as I got out of inpatient, which was largely a waste of time, I spent thousands of dollars to go to 12-step meetings, no individual counseling, nothing new, no tools, no techniques. Just basically I sat, locked in a room, for 3 days. That was a colossal waste of time. But when I got
your porn use.
Yeah, and right. I couldn't. Yeah, I mean that's it. I couldn't act out. That's one of the benefits of being in an inpatient facility is you can't really act out. Although there were plenty of people in there hanky-pankying with each other, but I was in such a low place. That's how bad I was and how banged up I was. I wasn't even interested in that, and I knew I had to get the right help. I knew I had to find somebody that wasn't going to. Just the thought of spending months talking about mom and dad again, the history, the thought of surrendering and being powerless and going to meetings and holding hands and sitting in a room listening to people to talk about, their slips. It just really made me sick to my stomach, Filip. I just knew I couldn't do what hadn't worked in the past. And since I was unemployed, I had a lot of time to myself. So I started doing some research, and I started researching things like the efficacy of the disease-based model. And I remember just being shocked. Like, what do you mean 10%? 15% success rate. At best, the University of Cambridge did a study on 12 steps for alcohol, and the success rate was 20-something%, low 20s. And I was like, oh my God, Like no one told me that this method doesn't work for most people. Not once in my life had any one of the experts that I had been seeing told me, hey, just so you know that this 80-year-old model really doesn't work for most people. And we've got the data that substantiates that quite significantly, time and time again, study after study after study after study. And so I knew I couldn't do that. And I was very fortunate. I found a gentleman in Walnut Creek, California. His name is George Collins. And George Collins wrote a book called Breaking the Cycle, Free Yourself from Porn Addiction, Sex Obsession, and Shame. And this was a guy who'd been to some pretty low places himself. And so I was really, really excited to connect with somebody who knows what I feel like. Not read about what I feel like, but knows what I feel like. And it was through this relationship where he helped me see, I've always had this interest in Eastern philosophy. I've always been interested in meditation. And this was the guy who, for me, first brought those pieces together. I never saw that fascination as something that I would do as part of my recovery. It just wasn't. You meditated, it's good, make you spiritually raise, put you on a higher spiritual plane and, float around like the Buddha and everybody's happy and blissful and yada, yada, yada. Although I meditated, I never did so in a disciplined way. And then I started to learn about habits. I started to learn that our triggers don't go away. Our thoughts are the result of decades of programming. I learned how habits manifest themselves in our lives. And, very quickly in that relationship, about maybe only 4 months in, this man who had been treating me said, "You have a gift." He had seen me work with other people. He'd have me talk to people who couldn't afford him. So I talked to him, helped put him on the right track, give him some free sessions. I participated in a couple of groups. So he had seen me, quote unquote, in action. And he says, "You should be doing this for your life." And my first reaction was, that is the stupidest thing I ever heard. I'm an executive. I'm a lawyer. What am I going to be, a life coach? Mm-hmm. You got to be kidding me. Like, seriously, that's your advice? You're a guy who works with all these fancy people, and that's the advice you bring to me? His credibility plummeted. And then I realized that, I started asking myself these questions, like, why not me? He's successful. He did it. I brought all these gifts to my career. Why? And my greatest satisfaction in life was helping people. The more I helped people, the better I felt. And I remember walking out of inpatient, Filip, and I said to myself, I am never coming back to this place. I don't care if I have to dedicate the rest of my life to self-help and make peanuts. I am never coming back to this place. I'm never going to sink this low again. I don't care if I've got to dedicate the rest of my life to self-help. That's what I'm going to do. And then here, this guy presented me with this opportunity to work for him. Now, he had been on Anderson Cooper. He's got a book out, so he's got this credibility. And I thought to myself, well, if I could work with him, well, that would help me build my career. And then, really the 7 years later, the rest is history. But that's where it started. And that's when I decided to obsessively focus on myself and start helping other people. And it was in those moments where my whole life changed in a really profound way.
Didn't you have a relapse or a stumble? Because with those really difficult habits like addiction, porn addiction, weed addiction, other kind of addictions they have, in the moment that you were anxious or stressed or there was a conflict, because this happens a lot with people, because you think, yeah, I have the insight now, I have the dedication. Now I'm finally never going to do it again. And then they smoke weed and they broke up with their girlfriend, and then they
do it again.
And they jerk off again, and then feel shameful, light another joint, and start drinking alcohol, and then like, whoa, what happened? And they slip up and fall back again into their old habits.
Yeah, in the beginning, a couple things happened for me, and I don't recommend anyone take this path. This is just my journey. Because I had sunk so low and because I had lost so much, the prostitution stuff really plummeted, really, really plummeted. I might have had some slips very early in my recovery, just getting into recovery, but that behavior kind of stayed low. Doesn't mean I haven't gotten triggered. Of course I have. Doesn't mean I haven't had thoughts about getting a prostitute or going to a strip club. Of course I have, but I didn't act on it. So yeah, there was absolutely some slips in the beginning where porn was a little harder to kick, just because my behavior was so egregious. Quite frankly, Filip, I didn't see porn as a major problem. It wasn't in my mind. It wasn't a major problem. I just had to stop lying and cheating and stop using drugs. So I was still focused on the stopping of doing something. And then as I, got to myself to a place where I had stabilized and I realized that I wanted to level up, I asked myself if porn was doing anything for me. Was it helping me? Was it making me a better lover? Was it helping me connect with my partner? And the answer, of course, for me was no. It's still a dirty secret. I'm watching some pretty messed up stuff that isn't going to help me in my relationship. And so I then decided to quit porn, and there were some slips, but it's probably been about 6+ years, since I've masturbated to pornography. Left that behind me, left the drugs behind me, left the compulsive sexual behavior behind me, but there were absolutely slips in the beginning. That's true.
Was there overcompensation in the sex with your wife?
No, I was what they call a sexual anorexic, in that I was unable to express that part of myself with my intimate partner. I was just unable to, connect sexually in a healthy way. And we had to rebuild that relationship. I had to learn to let that darker part of my sexuality flow, because I was withholding sex from my wife. I was resentful. There's a part of me that was resentful because she's now, keeping me from doing all the things that I wanted to do. And but as we moved closer and closer together, I was able to let that part of myself heal. And I was able to open up that part of myself to her. And, since then we've had a great sex life, but it wasn't overcompensating with her. In fact, because she was someone who I loved, who I cared about, it was actually difficult to connect sexually with her in the beginning.
When clients come to you and they struggle with a porn addiction or any other addiction, what are some symptoms or what are some things clients come to you for that they really have a problem with, or that they finally decided to contact you?
Yeah, so for the guys who finally decide to contact me, what usually is the case is that their addiction to porn is started to bleed over in other areas of their life. So this hobby that many of us men started since we were children was no longer able to be contained. It wasn't just here. It wasn't just on the internet. It started to bleed over. So first place that's going to suffer is the relationship. That connected, committed relationship started to suffer.
If they have one.
If they have one. A lot of my guys do. A lot of my guys are married, but the relationship begins to suffer. Then they realize too that they're profoundly underachieving in all aspects of their life. Their career, their finances, their health, their hobbies, their relationships, their spirituality, if that's important for them, is all subpar, all less than. And that's the common denominator of every client that I've had, is that the behavior, even if they perceive it to be compartmentalized, particularly with porn guys, I say to my, porn guys who call me, I'm like, listen, here's your problem. You're addicted to a shitty life. You got a shitty life problem, bigger than your porn problem, because people, because of the popularity of the disease-based model, they see their lives through this very narrow window. They see that it's the porn, and I've got a porn problem. And my job is to help them take those blinders off, because I have never, Filip, worked with a client. To this day, I have never worked with a client whose primary problem was sex related. The sex is never the primary problem. It is always the symptom. The porn is the symptom. The behavior is the symptom. It's a symptom of a deeper, bigger hole that they are trying to feed in themselves. The best way I can describe it is a profound and deep lack of love for self. That's the common denominator of every client that I've ever worked with, and exposing them to that, helping them see that so they can begin making holistic changes in all aspects of their life, is going to move them forward much faster than even empowering them to stop their porn use. That's important, but it's not the most important thing.
How can they start developing self-love? Because often self-love is being done to those people who mostly want approval from others, but they want to just love themselves first before they want appreciation or long for appreciation of others. But it's so dependent on other people letting them feel significant. So what are some habits or mindset shifts or things people can do to truly feel significant themselves and start loving themselves without anyone else needing to give them approval to feel that way?
And I like to teach that love is an action verb, right? So when I talk to my clients, and I like to start with the basics. The basics, even though I work with very intelligent, high net worth, successful men and their partners, the fundamental five, the basics, like the obvious, the low-hanging fruit. Are you eating well? Are you sleeping well? Are you hydrating? Are you exercising? Are you practicing mindfulness? I call those things the fundamental five, because the truth is, what are you going to, what can you expect to accomplish when you are not executing in those areas? You don't even love yourself enough to hydrate. You don't even love yourself enough to eat well. You don't even love yourself to exercise. Basic. I think we dramatically overcomplicate things in certain aspects of recovery. And I teach them that if you say you love yourself, prove it. And prove it by taking care of the basics. Take care of the fundamentals. And I've had so many clients, not all of them, but so many clients like realize like by hydrating. Like I got one client, he's from Long Island, and he talks like this. He's like your typical New Yorker. And he's like, oh my God, Craig, this is the best advice I've ever gotten. I can't believe it. I'm hydrating my body. Whoa, what other advice you got for me? I should eat well too?
Isn't it all like, oh my God?
Oh my God. It's so obvious. It's so obvious. You know it. I know it. But they're not doing those things. They're not executing on those things. They're not taking care of themselves. They're not prioritizing themselves.
I had a lot of people who struggle with something as a habit and productivity coach also, and they're just focusing on the margin. They're not focusing on the fundamentals. Like, yeah, but I want to have a 6-figure business in like 6 months. I mean, like, okay, that's fine, but I asked you to go to sleep before a certain time so you have refreshing sleep, and you weren't able to do that consistently.
Right. How are you going to make 6 figures? I want to make $1 million. Like, you're not taking care of yourself. This is a marathon. And you're right. So many people, like, they focus on the behavior that they want to stop. And of course, that's a part of it, Filip. But the truth is that what you resist persists. That is a psychological fact. And the more time you spend obsessing, let's take porn addiction. I feel real bad for a lot of these guys who haven't found me or haven't found you or haven't found people like us that are bringing that holistic approach. these poor guys, they're spending 2-3 times a week in these 12-step meetings talking about, I haven't looked at porn. It's been, 3 days, 300 days, whatever it is. You're still talking about porn. Like a year later, the porn is still the center of your reality. And the more you obsess on it, the more you focus on it, the more that not doing the thing is the center of your recovery plan, the more power that thing has over you.
Yeah, this is the thing that often happens with these groups. They cultivate a bit of a victim identity, and they're so much associated with the porn thing, besides like changing it, that they're attached to that identity, while it should become progressively more unnecessary to talk about porn, because your new identity finds porn so repulsive that you wouldn't have to go to meetings anymore to start talking about porn, and maybe talk about other passions or positive expressions and habits that you have. And you want to start talking about that because it just doesn't interest you anymore to associate with that kind of identity and behavior.
That's right. That's right. And I think what you just described and the way you described it perfectly illustrates the harm in the disease-based model when it keeps the thing that you don't want to do at the center of your universe. It's like it becomes their sun. Everything revolves around them not doing the thing, let alone the fact that the model is woefully flawed, doesn't work for most people. And in the relationship context, here's what happens to these guys. There's this one up, one down power dynamic that exists in their relationship. Their partner's up, they're down. Everything is seen through their addiction. They didn't take out the trash. That's their addict talking. They didn't call to check in. That's their addict talking. Everything is perceived through that disease-based model, and that wreaks double, triple havoc on the relationship. So now you've got, not only is that thing the center of your universe and you're focusing on the wrong thing, it's also become the center of the universe in your relationship. And you're not dealing with the complicated relationship issues that brought you to this place. You're not dealing with the unsafety that you experience in the relationship and sharing your authentic self with your partner. Well, first of all, you don't know who your authentic self is. But even when you begin to discover that, still everything is seen through the lens of the addiction. So it's, I get it a little bit more for my guys who are cheating. But so many porn guys are so stuck in that place, obsessively focused on not doing the thing, yet they haven't changed any other aspect of their lives. And they're ultimately set up to fail if they're not already failing in terms of what it is they want to accomplish. They're living a life of not doing something versus doing something else.
Yeah, it's a kind of negative identity. It's not constructive, it's deconstructive. But if all you do is deconstructive, you have nothing to build upon.
That's right.
For some people who struggling with the porn addiction and they want to quit, you said replacing it by healthy habits. What are some things people should do and should choose not to do? And are some questions that people can ask themselves, methods, tools that people could make sure that they stay on the right track and are focusing on the right thing?
Yep. So the quick recap: eat well, sleep well, hydrate, exercise, and meditate. Mindfulness is changing the way mental health is being treated all over the world. Study after study demonstrates the efficacy of sitting and meditating, sitting and breathing. That's it. Sitting and focusing on that breath reduces attachment to compulsive urges, increases well-being, reduces the stress level cortisol in your brain, reduces your attachment to those thoughts. So mindfulness is absolutely critical, absolutely critical. However, the science behind breaking habits is as follows. To break a habit, you have to make a habit. So when that's real, Philip. That's the latest science that we have around changing habits. So what that means from a systemic perspective is that means that your success is a function of you doing something else. So your success in not doing the thing is going to be a function of you doing something else. And it's so important to drive that point home because, again, so many people out there listening to this realized they had a problem with this aspect of their sexuality, and they've gone online, and the solution says stop doing the thing. That's level one. Level one is to stop doing the thing. But and here's the reality: it's not even a good level one, because obsessively focusing on not doing the thing only increases the power that thing has over you. So you've got to be doing something else. One of the most interesting components for me is that other side of that mindfulness coin, which is habits. So habits control our lives. We need habits to survive. You and I couldn't be talking. I couldn't be typing on the keyboard. I couldn't reach over and grab my iced coffee cup here without habits, right? You see a baby try to grab a cup, they can't do it. But me and you, we can do it real easy. Habits control our lives, and habits manifest themselves in our lives in a very specific way. We get triggered, we have thoughts that frame that reality, and then we take action. So helping clients understand their habit cycle, and in fact, one of the most important exercises in my program that I prescribe is clients are assigned to track their triggers, their thoughts, and then their actions for a period of 7 days, so they can begin to develop an awareness around how the negativity is manifesting itself in their lives. And once you understand how the negativity is manifesting itself, the triggers, the thoughts that frame that experience, and then the action, then you're able to create different actions. First of all, the triggers aren't going away. There's no universe where we don't notice beauty. Look, I look out the window, I see a pretty lady. Oh, energy shift in the body from positive to negative. That's wired in us as men, Philip. That's not going away. But I can use the awareness around that trigger to prompt me to do something else. And that's why I teach clients how to create space between their thoughts and their action, and how to insert actions that can increase that space, declaring the thought wrong, snapping the elastic band on their wrist, mindful breathing, a forward fold, push-up, screaming, yelling, running around, something that break a habit, make a habit in that micro moment, in the context of that habit cycle. And ultimately what you do is you learn to use those triggers, your awareness of those triggers and those thoughts, to produce a positive action that's going to empower you. Because I've learned all my life, Philip, I wish those triggers would go away. I wish those thoughts would go away. I felt, I'm still having these thoughts. I must be a sicko, must be a crazy man. No, I'm a human being. I don't have to attach to those thoughts. I can use my awareness of them to prompt different action. And that has been a critical component to my success, and a critical component of the mindful habit system that I teach to clients all over the world.
What are some misconceptions people have about habits or habit implementation?
Well, I think some people believe that 21 days a habit's going to change. That's just a rule of thumb. That's a common misconception. Habits each have their own lifespan. And the reality is that people think that they're going to get to a place where they're not going to be triggered. They think they're going to get to a place where they're not going to have thoughts. And I think that is the biggest misconception, because as long as they think that way, they're off. That's not reality. That's not how the body works. There's a biology in play here that these habits are wired in us. And so instead of feeling bad about yourself when you get triggered, feeling bad about yourself of having these thoughts, your awareness of those two things can prompt a different action. And so that's a big misconception. The time frame around habits is a big misconception. Obsessively focusing on the thing that they want to avoid doing, big misconception. The disease-based model being the only path to success, big misconception. It is not. It is an 80-year-old model that, when studied, does not help most people. That's a fact.
Is there any habit that you still would like to try out and that you would like to pick up that you know could be potentially beneficial to you?
More mindfulness. I'm really, really trying to up my mindfulness game. I'm stuck at the 20 to 30 minute mark. I'd love to be meditating every day for an hour. I have the time to do that. I work for myself. Not only do I have my own mental health challenges, but another gift I've been given is chronic pain. I've been in 7 car accidents. I've had 6 concussions. I've fractured my skull. I've had low back surgery. I've had jaw surgery. I have Crohn's disease. I have arthritis in my knees, hips, and elbows, wrists, fingers, and an as of yet undiagnosed chronic muscle pain. And I think I left a couple things out. So managing my pain, and particularly being an opiate addict, has been really, really, really challenging. And there are a number of studies that document, mindfulness as being incredibly effective for pain relief. And so one of the habits that I'm working on this year is to up my mindfulness game from 20 to 30 minutes to a full hour. That's something I'm trying to do. I practice yoga a few times a week, so I feel strong there. And now I've realized too that the yoga is only going to take me so far. I need more strength training. So this year is also dedicated to me building the strength in my body, because my body, despite my efforts, is still moving is still on the wrong track. In other words, the illness, the injuries still keep me from doing things, still have, are a prominent, part of my life in managing that pain. And I like to do a better job with that as I go forward.
Before we delve into the concluding questions, is there anything that you would still like to share or talk about that we haven't talked about yet?
I just want people to know that if you're struggling with any form of compulsive behavior, to know that your success is dependent upon you doing something else. To break a habit, you have to make a habit, and that's no joke. That means something. That means that you've got to do something else. And so many people, Filip, are stuck doing the thing. I'd really want to drive that point home for a lot of people. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, it's a good point, because they can say to themselves nothing changes because they're still focusing on what they aren't doing, that they choose not to be doing, but there's nothing actually being changed in their life. So the transformation of that energy or momentum into something constructive is not there. I remember when I was quitting porn, and I'm quitting porn, that you have this excess of energy sometimes that, if you do push-ups, you do exercise, you channel it. But if you're wrestling with that energy, you're like, no. And that thought of porn and resisting porn is still in your mind instead of channeling it to something more constructive.
That's exactly right. That is exactly right. So important.
What are some resources, mentors that were really inspiring for you and that people could also check out about mindfulness, addiction, or
Sure.
habits?
Well, first off, if you're struggling with compulsive sexual behavior in any way, shape, or form, I recommend George Collins's book, Breaking the Cycle. It was although he uses the term addiction throughout, it was really the first time that I had seen somebody bringing a different approach, a mindfulness approach to compulsive sexual behavior. It was the first time that I had seen someone providing me with tools, things that I could do in the moment to interrupt those thought patterns. So Breaking the Cycle by George Collins is a book that changed my life. George, I stand on his shoulders. He brought me to where I'm at. There's also a wonderful guy on Facebook called the Metal Motivator, metalmotivator.com. So I love heavy metal. I like all different kinds of music, but I love heavy metal. And when I was at my lowest point, Filip, I remember turning on the Facebook there, and I see this guy. He's got long hair. His name's CJ Ortiz, Ortiz. And he's talking about, medaling up and kicking ass and again, coming from that place where you're obsessively focusing on not doing the thing, that was such a perfect message for me. I needed that motivation, that inspiration, that kick in the butt. And that's what he provided to me. And we've since become great friends. I've got all of his products. He's got a number of tapes, CD series and audio files and whatnot. He's got a great Facebook page. He's got a great YouTube channel. So he was very important. The last person that I'll mention was John Kabat-Zinn from Boston University, the godfather of mindfulness in the Western world. He has done he's done more for mindfulness from a scientific perspective than anybody else. There are other people who are taking his work to the next level as we speak, but such a plethora of resources to understand how you can use mindfulness to counterbalance the power of habits that control our lives.
If I would give you the mic right now and you would be talking to young men right now who are sitting in front of their computer contemplating if they should watch porn, pants down with their dick in their hands, and you could just have the mic for like 1 minute, could you say something to these men, that is a message to those people and young men
Yes.
who would be addicted to porn?
Yes. Your sexuality as a man is a powerful part of you. It's a powerful component of who you are. It's not just this hobby. It's not just this little piece of us. And in fact, we know it's powerful because we know children who are sexually abused kill themselves at a higher rate than the rest of the population, all things being equal. So we know this part of us is powerful, and this part of you is powerful, and you need to honor that part of you. This is how you create life. This is how you create intimacy and love and connection with another person, and you need to nurture this power. You need to curate this power. You need to honor this power and channel it in a positive way, or else it will consume you. So be careful about what you do with your dick next, brother.
What would you like people to say at your funeral about you?
Yeah. Craig turned the worst thing that ever happened to him into something special that changed the life of millions of men and their partners worldwide. And Craig helped elevate the conversation around addiction and mindfulness, and in so doing not only created a beautiful life for him and his family, but empowered people all over the world to not stay stuck and to be the best versions of themselves.
Last question: what is a meaningful and fulfilling life?
Meaningful and fulfilling life for me is a great career, great relationships, exciting hobbies, a deep connected spirituality, having the finances to be able to fund some of the adventures that my family likes to go on. And of course, deep connections with other people, deep relationships. There's a great expression that I love, Filip: the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. And, I've got such a beautiful connection with my wife and with my children and with my family and with my friends. And, I look forward to that growing as life goes on.
I want to take a second to appreciate you about your raw vulnerability and straightforwardness, because you've come clean, and are very explicit and open about this. And it's an example that you can change your life and be also high functioning without functioning high, and help to change the life of people. If people want to find out more about you, the great work you're doing to help people with porn addiction, where can they get in touch with you and find out more about you and what your team does?
Great. Thank you, Filip. The best place to go is themindfulhabit.com. That's THE mindfulhabit, 2 words.com. And there you'll find my online group coaching program, our one-on-one work. You'll find a whole bunch of free resources, including my podcast, YouTube channel, et cetera, et cetera. But that's the place to go if you want to learn more about how to use mindfulness and habits to profoundly change your life.
Thanks so much, Craig. It was an honor.
Oh, privilege is all mine, my friend. Thank you, Filip.
Hey, it's Phil from Houte Bootcamps, and I help entrepreneurs and coaches achieve more in less time by boosting their productivity and sales. If you would also like to get on a free consultation call with me, you should go to habitbootcamps.com/getproductive or habitbootcamps.com/getsales. And if you like my podcast, don't forget to subscribe and check out my Habit Bootcamps Facebook group and YouTube channel for some more awesome content.